Trump just said he's not joking about a third term, and it really shouldn't be surprising because Steve Bannon's been saying this kind of thing on national news for a minute now. Like he got on the news in an interview not a month ago and said, yeah, we're working on a way to get around the whole two-term thing. So this shouldn't be a surprise, and I guess that's the point of this video. At what point do we get to call foolishness foolishness? Because it really feels like at every juncture, when Trump or his administration or his cronies gear up and threaten to do something, there's a wealth of highly qualified people, largely on centrist platforms, who get up there and say, oh no, he could never do that. He would never be able to do that because X, Y, and Z. And then he does it and they're all just aghast, like, oh, wow, well. And then he threatens to move it yet another inch further. And once again, they line up in droves to say, oh no, he could never, he would never. And he does it. With that said, I already anticipate that over the course of the next week or two, there will be no shortage of people with large platforms, in some respects larger than social media could ever offer, who get up and tell people, oh yeah, well, he could never do that because of the courts or because of this or because of that. At what point does that just qualify as a form of stupidity? There's a lack of pattern recognition that is just so profound for people to continually say that's not possible, that's not possible. It's happening. In my mind, and I really don't feel this is a sensationalist thing to say, there's a real possibility that this all boils down to some type of internal power struggle within the military. Because when you strip away all of the euphemisms and niceties and formalities, the power that this government has ultimately hinges on the threat of violence. So when you have an internal dispute between two branches, say the executive and the legislative, as we've seen play out several times over the course of the last few months, the question that's really lurking in the background of whatever question is supposedly actually on the table is who's really about that action and who can actually back this up with physical force. The military being the kid in the situation, it's the classic which parent do you want to stay with situation. The president is over the military. He's the commander in chief. When it comes down to it, I don't know. I feel like that's the only real question. Like when you really strip away all the bullshit and the minutia and the blah, 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 well, this, that, and the third. Who runs the military?
Trump called me this morning. We discussed a range of topics, including the possibility of him serving a third term. He's joked about it.
I've raised a lot of money for the next race that I assume I can't use for myself, but I'm not 100% sure.
But these were his most extensive comments yet. He told me he's not joking. He said there are methods by which you could do it, but he said it's far too early to think about it. He said he's focused on his current job. At the same time, I did press him on those methods. There's been some discussion about the possibility of Vice President J.D. Vance running perhaps at the top of the ticket with President Trump running in the number 2 slot and then swapping if they were to win. President Trump telling me that is a method. He said there are other methods. I asked if he could give me details, and he said flatly no. Now, President Trump's allies have said that they are seriously looking at this.
We're working on there. We're not prepared to talk about it publicly, but in a couple of months, I think we will be.
Here's what you need to know, though. It is incredibly complicated to change the Constitution. Serving a third term is prohibited by the Constitution. So this is something that would be far out of reach by any measure. And again, President Trump insisting for right now, he's focused on his current job.
We have some terrifying breaking news. Donald Trump is officially considering running for a third term. Earlier today, he told NBC that he's not joking and that there's multiple methods he could use to pull it off, such as having J.D. Vance run for president with himself as his vice president, and then once they're elected, they could switch roles. Trump also said that there's other methods he could use to secure a third term, but when NBC asked him to describe them, he flat out said no. Donald Trump thinks that he's above the American Constitution, and this is not the first time he's made that clear. In the past, he's titled himself as king, he's called for the termination of articles in the Constitution, he's called media outlets like CNN and MSNBC illegal. And this is why I say that Donald Trump has placed America into a constitutional crisis. He has absolutely zero respect for the rights that protect you, me, and every other American from a tyrannical government, and Americans need to prepare for 2028 because come the election, we need to make it clear that we reject a king, that we reject a third term, and we reject Trump.
I'm a firm believer that President Trump will run and win again in 2028. So I've already endorsed President Trump. A man like this comes along once every century if lucky. I'm a huge supporter. Want to see him again in 2028.
You know he's term limited. How do you think he gets another term?
We're working on it.
He can talk about a third term all he wants. By the end of all this, I'm gonna let y'all in on a little secret. His own voters aren't even gonna want him to run again. I mean, think about it. For one, it's there are people who have been on this MAGA train for 10 years now. By the end of this administration, it will be 14 years. And we saw even before he was elected how much people were already saying they were tired of the same old excuses, the same rhetoric. It was stale. Well, that's what's going to start happening. It'll get stale with his voters, and it'll ultimately get stale with people in Congress. Especially if Republicans lose the tiny grip that they have on the majority in the House. If these elections in Florida go the way that they are projected to go, the messaging in the Republican Party will change. Now, he's out here floating this war with Iran and, talking tough about Greenland and everything, because that will be the backup plan to losing seats in Congress. That will be the backup plan to having all of his policies and the things going on with Doge ultimately rolled back by the judges, which is already happening. They haven't found a real scapegoat that is, capturing the hearts and minds of their voters. They haven't been able to really change the conversation from how embarrassing he has been to MAGA while he's been in the Oval Office. It's starting to trickle into Fox News. You can see that they're kind of over it. They don't really want to keep explaining all the BS. And let me tell you, that plan he came up with JD Vance, that whole he runs and then Trump is the running mate and he hands it down, that ain't gonna happen. Think about it. Why would JD Vance go through the whole process of running for president, actually win, and then immediately give up that power? All you're doing is setting up the party to have a civil war, essentially. This is how things will ultimately end for the administration. They're going to tear each other apart. People are going to start picking sides because the Orange Man is, without a doubt, losing power. Everybody knows he's not sticking around after this particular term. Right now, we're seeing the Republican Party kind of starting to realize they are going to be a movement with no leader. They're not going to have anybody to rally around the same way they all rallied around the orange guy. And that is why he keeps talking about the third term. He's trying to convince everybody, even his own supporters, that the party is going to keep going. But the music is dying down, all right? It is not going to happen.